Hang on, didn't you do this before? Well yeah, 5 years ago. Being an old video, it's kinda got issues. Bad audio, bad video, and lots of games that went barely covered. I pretty much did the 3 Mega Drive games and left it at that. There's so much more to look at with Golden Axe. Arcade gems, ports galore, spin-off RPGs, and of course a modern game that most everybody disliked. So as I did with Altered Beast a while back, it's time to look at Golden Axe once more and give it the full rundown. The original Golden Axe hails from 1989, a golden year for the side-scrolling beat-em-up with countless stunning examples such as Final Fight, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, River City Ransom. Great stuff. Golden Axe came out early in the year and was made by the same fellas who did Altered Beast, a small team of 5 known as Team Shinobi who were led by Makoto Uchida and were part of Sega's AM1 arcade division. The game was inspired in particular by Uchida's love of action movies and Western-style fantasy. Conan the Barbarian is obviously a direct influence, but he was also a big fan of Lord of the Rings. This was Uchida's second Sega game after Altered Beast, and you can see the Western influences written large in that game too. Uchida believed that an arcade game should try to have as much substance as the big RPGs of the time, the Dragon Quests and what have you, and it is even said that at one point Golden Axe was initially going to be an RPG, although this was quickly shut down by the higher-ups. The other big influence on the game was, of course, Double Dragon, the 1987 game that had kicked off the golden age of beat-em-ups in the arcade. Sega wanted a Double Dragon style game without just flat out ripping off Double Dragon, and the fantasy setting of Golden Axe was ideal for it. The biggest puzzle of development for the game would be the series' Golden Rule. Everyone must use a weapon. No one fights with their fists in Golden Axe. This creates a different challenge in terms of designing a beat-em-up where weapons are permanent instead of temporary. You don't want weapons to have too big a range, otherwise they'll be overpowered and you'll lose the balance, but if you make it too small and put it in the hands of a big sprite, well, it might look a bit silly. The solution? Decrease the size of the sprites. The weapons are the reason why Golden Axe's characters are significantly smaller than, say, Final Fights. This is also true of games such as TMNT and Capcom's Dynasty Wars. Said games, including Golden Axe, also make use of big boss characters to intensify the game and make it feel like more of a challenge. All that aside, the game came out on time and was a significant arcade hit. It's one of the first games I remember playing and loving in an arcade. Playing it today, it's still easy to see why, as it's a very strong beat-em-up indeed. The thing that strikes me about Golden Axe is that it's a more considered beat-em-up than a lot of others, slower paced and even somewhat strategic, as opposed to bashing buttons and going in all guns blazing. Uchida wanted the fights to feel like actual clashes. Enemies move slowly and carefully, and you always have to try and get into that sweet spot, not too close in but not far away. Uchida has likened this to hitting a baseball with a bat. Enemies occasionally rush in, or they'll try and flank you, and you end up doing a fair bit of lateral moving in order to get in position. It may have less sprites on screen than something like Final Fight does, but Golden Axe does a lot with what it has. Our 3 heroes, Axe Battler, Tyrus Flare, and Julius Thunderhead, 3 fighters who have suffered personally at the hands of the evil Death Adder and his attempts to destroy the Kingdom of Uria, all feel notably different as well. There's the typical choice between all-rounder speed and strength, of course, but magic is the big factor. Julius lacks any powerful magic but makes up for it with melee combat skills, whereas Tyrus is the opposite with spells that can one-shot virtually every normal enemy in the game. You get magic potions and food intermittently by kicking the arse of little thieves, and you decide when to use this magic. Do you concentrate on using low-powered spells often, or save up potions for a big spell against a boss? Normally I do the latter, as even Tyrus, my speciality, is pretty nifty when it comes to combat. You get plenty of moves, dash attacks, backslashes, and the almighty downward stab. The best way to deal with most any enemy, if you can, is to knock them down, then run and jump for the downward stab. It's tricky to time, but if you get them, it does a ton of damage. The really striking parts of Golden Axe though, it's the little things. The Bizarrians that you use in combat in many ways replace the function of traditional weapons, powerful attacks that you get to use for a short time until you're inevitably knocked off of them. The fireball throwing dragon is indeed a game breaker, so it makes sense that you only get it once for a quite limited amount of time. I love how cohesive the game is. All of the stages are memorable, from the village on the back of a turtle to flying on the back of a great eagle, and they all fit into each other, almost as if the game could be one massive stage if it wanted to be. There's other great touches. The skeletons don't just look like Ray Harryhausen's work, they move like it too. The blood-curdling screams sampled from First Blood, the fact that dead enemies stay on the screen instead of fading out, and the chicken leg making a second appearance in a Sega game after featuring an altered beast. Golden Axe does a great job of emulating the works that it's influenced by, the Conans, Red Sonjas, Flesh and Bloods and all that good stuff. It's arguably the best Conan game to not have an actual Conan license. There's still that great sense of impending doom as you finally reach the inside of Death Adder's castle, and the satisfaction you get when you finally send that axe flying into his body never becomes old. Not to mention the really fun ending where all the characters burst out of the arcade machine. It's not as well remembered today as some of the other beat-em-ups in 1989, but honestly, I'd have to say it's my favourite from that year. A lot of that is down to pure nostalgia and bias, but I still find the arcade game a ton of fun, just as much as it was for a lot of people back in the day. Indeed, so many people had fun with it that a port to Sega's new 16-bit console was inevitable. This was an absolute no-brainer really. Golden Axe found its way onto the Mega Drive pretty quickly, being released right before Christmas 1989 in Japan and the US, and winter 1990 in Europe, although to be fair that was because the MD didn't come out until 1990 over here. In doing this, it managed to have a reasonably accurate home version of the game quite a ways before a lot of its contemporaries like Final Fight and TMNT, and naturally it came with 2 player options to boot. Just how good is this port then? It's pretty strong indeed. It's been a while since we've seen a system provide such a strong-looking port of an arcade game, perhaps not since the early days of the NES and Donkey Kong and what have you, so the consoles are getting closer. Of course the arcades would immediately pull away again, but hey-ho. The Mega Drive Golden Axe port is certainly there graphically. It really doesn't lose out by much at all in a side-by-side comparison to the arcade. As far as 16-bit games go, yeah, it's a show of strength. Even the complex magical effects aren't that far off in this version. I still get a pretty big kick out of this port. It's another Mega Drive game I've played a hell of a lot, although like a lot of others I almost never played it on an original cart and instead played it on Mega Games 2, which was released in 1993. Seriously, the 1-2-3 punch of this, Revenge of Shinobi and Streets of Rage on one cart might make this the best compilation ever. I've guided these characters, mostly Tyrus I have to say, to victory many a time, and it's always fun because it's just difficult enough to never quite make it a sure fin. Indeed, I've probably played this more than the original arcade game, as good as that is. One thing that's good about the port is that it does feature some extras to keep the motor running that little bit longer. There is of course the duel mode, a 12-round battle of endurance on the ramparts between yourself and all of the game's enemies except for Death Adder, from the Henningers right up to the Golden General Bitters. Each battle has a strict timer, although the only thing this affects is whether the battle scores or not. As with the arcade game, you get a strength meter at the end of each playthrough, which doubles as a high score table. There's the beginner mode, which most of you have probably never seen. It's just the first 3 stages of the game, and then you fight the almighty Death Adder Jr. at the end of the 3rd. The original game itself features an extra stage, which in an amusing twist is the easiest stage of the entire game for reasons which will become clear, and a final battle with Death Brinner, which is easily the hardest part of the game. He's accompanied by 2 immortal skeletons, has an attack which is very hard to avoid, and if he hits you he'll follow up with magic that will likely kill you in one shot. Once again, it is very satisfying to beat this man, especially when you do it with just 2 bars of energy left. However, the port isn't without fault, mainly the enemies. They're a lot easier to deal with. They always have a set way of following you, and things that they will most always do. If they're far enough away and they can dash, they'll always charge you, and they come to you in the same way no matter what. At various points in the game, these 2 fins can be manipulated to easily make enemies fall to their doom, especially in the aforementioned last stage, which is easy despite featuring the toughest mobs in the game. All the enemies do this, which can make them feel samely. This doesn't mean though that things like skeletons won't cause you trouble. Sheer speed and variety makes them easily the toughest enemies of the game. The Bitters, on the other hand, which were probably the hardest in the arcade game, pretty easy. While you can't really dash them due to their sword attack most of the time, it's easy to manipulate them into being hit constantly. And as always, the tackle, 1, downward stab combo is the key to a quick victory. It's certainly key to defeating Deathbringer, as a few of them will bring him down to size in no time. That said, it's still an excellent port in many ways. I'd be foolish to say that I didn't like it because I've played through it so many damn times and I know it inside out. It's hard to think of another port from the arcade that was more impressive than Golden Axe was at the time of its release. Like Altered Beast before it, it was still a relatively new arcade game, one with very few cigarette burns on it, so to speak. And here it is in the home, virtually intact. Not totally arcade perfect, of course, but close enough so that casual people who weren't looking for differences would barely notice. In many ways, it's 16-bit gaming in a nutshell, and even when the cracks do show, it's still a lot of fun. But of course, the Mega Drive version is far from the only one. We have lots of ports to get through, especially when we get to Computer Land. First up, there's the obligatory 8-bit version for the Master System. As far as these things go, it's okay. Certainly a lot better than Altered Beast on the Master System, that's for sure. The graphics are certainly cut down a fair bit, but it's not too bad for 8 bits, and all the enemies are still here. There are some cuts, of course. You don't get any of the extra stuff that appeared in the Mega Drive version, so there's no Deathbringer or anything like that. Biggest of all though is that 2 characters are cut. There's no Tyrus or Gilius, just Axe Battler, who is renamed Tariq for this version. You can choose between the 3 different magics, mind you. Axe's usual Earth, Tyrus's Fire, and Gilius's Lightning. Of the Master System Sega arcade port sits somewhere in the middle, not on the level of Outrun or Space Harrier, but not bad either. And while we're still on Sega, it should be noted that Golden Axe appeared on the Mega CD 5-in-1 Sega Classics pack. It's basically the Mega Drive version with the addition of Red Book music from the arcade, a couple of very weak voice samples, and unfortunately it can only be played in single player. The only other console version of the game came out for the PC Engine CD and was developed by Telenet. As with other games such as Space Harrier, Shinobi and the like, it made sense for Sega to release games on NEC's machine in Japan only, where the PC Engine was the clear number 2 behind Nintendo. Being a CD game, you get the usual anime cutscenes for each character, as well as more Red Book music, this time an arranged soundtrack, which is pretty good. Alas, it's the only thing that's good here. It's hard to say what happened with this one. The port is utterly botched. It moves so choppy, the graphics make the Master Systems look great, the enemy placement is all over the shop, controls unresponsive, and the sound effects, they're a joke. It even commits a cardinal beat-em-up sin of putting you all the way back to the start of a stage when you use a continue. It's an appalling game that's often regarded as one of the very worst PC Engine titles, and far below Telenet's usual standards. Shambolic. Okay, right, off to the computers. Lots of UK microports here, most of which was published by Virgin and developed by Probe. First off, I really like the cover art they used on these ports. A very nice little fantasy painting, that's what I usually think of when it comes to the game's art. Other than that, all the usual suspects are represented here, and we'll start off with the Amiga. And hey, it's good. Sure, the movement's obviously a bit slower, and we don't have as many frames in the animation, but it's very recognisably Golden Axe. There's not much left out at all, and the controls actually work fine with a single button. The music on this version is really good too. The only trouble with it is that it's very easy. The speed at which you swing the sword does make it rather straightforward to stun lock most every enemy in the game, making it a bit of a breeze. Still a fine conversion though. The Atari ST version is mostly the same. There's a few changes to the HUD, different music, and the scrolling's a bit choppier of course, but it's still a very serviceable game of Golden Axe. That's the big micros. How about the little ones? The C64 version starts off great, an awesome arrangement by Jerome Tell for the music, but sadly it's all downhill from there. This is just really dull. You only fight one enemy at a time, and for most of a stage it's the exact same enemy. Again, it's very easy. Just stand in place and swing your sword at the enemy moving dumbly forward at you. Graphically it's fine, but game-wise, dull. And there's lots missing too, including, ridiculously, the final stage of the game. Nope, you don't even get to fight Death Adder in this one. This is a very slow and very boring game, and you'd really have to be dedicated to grind it out all the way to the end, and then to not even get the proper bloody ending. It's disappointing because you think that the C64 should have been capable of a lot more here, especially when you compare it to the Spectrum and Amstrad versions. Considering the power of these two systems, the Spectrum 128K and Amstrad CPC versions do deliver. Sure, it's not exactly nice looking, but it's fine for these two. And we've got a nice AY rendition of the Jerome Tell arrangement. Game-wise, they also differ from the other ports we've seen by being frankly hard as nails. This is a mean game of Golden Axe where your characters can die very quickly and the mobs are very much intact. Here you can happily fight with 3 or even 4 enemies at once, no problem. And they're both 2-player games as well. They're not great by any means, but they're okay. If one of these was all you had, then you'd be happy enough with Golden Axe on here. Oh, and guess what? Unlike the C64 version, you can beat Death Adder here. And so the Alan Sugar systems give Commodore an outright spanking when it comes to Golden Axe. There is one more port to look at, mind you. PC-DOS, one we don't always see here at Kim Towers, and that sometimes produces rather shocking results. Off the bat, the PC version is different because it's actually a port of the Mega Drive version, complete with the dual, beginner mode, and the extra stage against Deathbringer. And, well, it's easily the strongest computer port of Golden Axe. It might be a little choppy still, but the VGA graphics are fantastic, and again, everything is here. Indeed, there's more than all the other computer ports that just follow the arcade version. It's even better when played with a joystick, of course, but I didn't do too badly even with the numpad. A very fine port indeed, this one. There is one other thing too. If you go into the games folder, you'll find all the models. And if you rename any model to, say, Dwarf, the name for Julius Thunderhead, you can play as them. You can play as literally anyone in the game, from Death Adder to a frickin' villager. It's obviously kind of buggy, but still amusing to do. Anyway, PC folk loved this game back in the day, and it's easy to see why, as I would say it's probably one of the first PC ports to really do the arcade game justice. PC Format even named it one of the best 50 PC games ever. That was back in 1991, mind you. In any case, it's a great bit of work, and the best computer Golden Axe port. Anyway, that's the original, all ports covered. Not bad this time out actually. Aside from the lousy PC Engine and C64 games, they're a pretty good little bunch. Golden Axe as a game was definitely served well by its arcade ports. Of course, it would be the only game in the series to get such a treatment. Most every other title in the franchise appeared on just one platform only. But we certainly have a long way to go still. Now, the subject of Golden Axe sequel is a very mixed bag depending on what game you're talking about. First up in the timeline, however, is the Mega Drive sequel, Golden Axe 2, released in late 1991. Another big guy with a big devil-horned helmet has taken control of the Golden Axe. His name is Dark Gould, and once again it's up to our 3 heroes to put a stop to his silly nonsense before he destroys the kingdom. It's worth noting immediately that Golden Axe 2 is actually the only other game in the franchise to feature the original 3 heroes. It gets a little bit sketchier from here on out. For now though, we're still riding with Axe, Tyrus and Julius. In the first video I was pretty harsh towards this game, calling it little more than a retread of the original. I still don't think it's that good, but I am going to be less harsh. Yes, Golden Axe 2 is very close to the original game. In many ways it feels like an old version of DLC. There aren't all that many enemies in Golden Axe 2 that could be considered new. A lot of them are reskins. Minotauros, for example, are just the same as Bad Brothers, and Hell Lizards are the same as Amazons. The main new enemy is the Magician, which replaces the Thief. They actually have an offensive attack, although it is of course terrible because at the end of the day these guys are meant to dispense spellbooks. There are little improvements to the play here and there. Something about Golden Axe 2 is that little bit smoother and cleaner than the original, with the hit detection cleaned up a bit. I noticed that you can control a downward stab now, which makes it a bit easier to hit. The enemy AI is largely still the same, you can still manipulate them to walk off ledges. However, Death Armors, who replace Bitters, are much harder here, especially because they evade dashes. The biggest technical improvement is to magic. Now you can hold the A button down and choose what level of spell you cast, meaning you don't have to burn all your spellbooks on a single big shot anymore. That's good. Still, yeah, it's very similar to the original technically. Business has certainly picked up graphically though, the game's art is very good indeed. As memorable as the original? Possibly not, but quality-wise, it's a keeper. The colours just pop that much more. The soundtrack is also fantastic just about all the way through, especially the first level theme, which is my favourite Golden Axe song of the whole series. Golden Axe 2 in and of itself isn't a bad game. It is a bit annoying in that there's not much of a jump between the original and number 2. It's not a Streets of Rage type dealie. But yeah, it's okay, particularly if you like Golden Axe. If you don't, then it's probably not going to change your mind. While we're on console still, there is something else to cover before the next big game, the two 8-bit spin-offs. First up, there's Golden Axe Warrior for the Master System, which features another hero going up against the giant Death Adder, this time on his own. To do so, he must find the 9 crystals of the royal family of Firewood in various dungeons before finding the Golden Axe and beating Death Adder himself. As you can see, it's a lot like Legend of Zelda, and I do mean a frickin' lot. Which doesn't mean it's bad, it's actually a very good Zelda clone, and even if there is nothing original whatsoever about it, it's still a good game, albeit one that will set you back a pretty penny. The one I have more experience with is Axe Battler: A Legend of Golden Axe, also from 1991 and for the Game Gear. I used to play this a lot back in the day, on holiday, in hospital once, lots of memories. It is also a bit of a Zelda clone. This time around it's more like Zelda 2, seeing as you have a top-down overworld, but then battles and dungeons are played out side-scrolling platform style. You learn various new moves for your character along the way, and yeah, that's it. It's a very linear, short and quite easy game. Disappointingly, it doesn't even have a proper ending boss battle or anything like that. Axe merely cuts down the darkness at the end of the final dungeon in a text cutscene. Still, memories are good and generally it's alright. I always get the feeling with both this and Golden Axe Warrior, however, that they started out as something else. The Axe Battler character is completely different, as are a lot of the enemies. They don't feel much like Golden Axe, although they are not bad games. In any case, the series finally does have its own RPG now, so hooray for that. But now we're going back to business. For most people, the proper Golden Axe sequel is its arcade return, 1992's Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder. The hack and slasher comes back in 32 glorious bits, and they're all on show. This game was pretty damn awesome to see in the flesh, with tons of sprites, big effects, 4-player action. Indeed, 4, there's a new character. In fact, only Gilius remains from the original trio, riding on the back of a giant named Goa. Sternblade is the Axe Battler alike, and then there's 2 pretty new ones. Dora, a female centaur, and Little Trix, a young kid who moves pretty fast, kinda like Golden Axe's version of Skate from Streets of Rage 2. One thing remains the same though, Death Adder's about, and he's up to no good. This game for many people is the top Golden Axe game. It's easy to see why. Look at it, it's clearly very freaking good. The battles and the animations are so clean and spectacular, the effects of the magic particularly memorable, especially as you see some poor grunt's face melt off due to being cleansed with fire. Every character serves a purpose, from a big giant who can crush most enemies and do lots of crowd control, to Little Trix who can use his magic to heal himself or his friends. The jump from the original to this is akin to Streets of Rage 1 to 2, if not even greater. Magic is improved again. While you don't get to choose a level of magic, you can pick up as many potions as you want. Being an arcade game, this one is pretty hard. If I had to say one thing, is that it does lose a couple of the things that made Golden Axe more unique. It's a much faster game and feels that little bit more like a traditional beat 'em up, as opposed to the slow hacking action of Golden Axe. This isn't really a complaint though, because Revenge of Death Adder is still damn good at that. The multiple paths also help a lot, there's so much to see here. It's bloody great, and the final battle against Death Adder is one of the most dramatic you'll find in an arcade beat 'em up. As far as weapon-based beat 'em ups go, and especially as a 4-player beat 'em up experience, it's right up there. Only the Dungeons and Dragons games would give this stiff competition. It's a true classic. And alas, one that never made its way home. I guess that being released in 1992 put it in a bit of an awkward position. This was a 32-bit game, and there's no way that the Mega Drive or Mega CD could have done it justice. One really wishes it had made its way to the Saturn or even the 32X, but by that time, well, there was another Golden Axe game out, which we'll be talking about in a bit. It surprises me to this day that, as popular as it is, Revenge of Death Adder has never had a re-release of any kind. Although knowing Sega, there could be a myriad of reasons for that, most probably lost source code. In any case, it's back home for another bit of axe in action. In 1993, Sega started making noise about the latest Golden Axe game. Indeed, it got previewed a fair bit in Western magazines with lots of screenshots and the like. However, Golden Axe 3 wouldn't come out over here. For whatever reason, Sega decided against releasing it in the West. The only way to play it back in the day was either importing it or playing it on the Sega channel, where it did make a few appearances. If you imported it, yeah, you might have got burnt just a little. I was far too kind to this game when I did it first time around, I have to say. Golden Axe 3 once again features another giant guy with an axe who takes over, and you already know the score. This time none of the original cast is playable. It seems as though Julius has assembled this team, but they're all different. Kane Grinder and Sarah Byrne take the place of Axe and Tyrus respectively. We have the giant Proud Cragger, and a fast Pantherman Kronos Evil Late. Yes, Pantherman, not a lizard. The bad guy's name this time around is Damned Hellstrike, which is at the very least somewhat metal, an improvement over Dark Gould in any case. Golden Axe 3 at the very least does not feel the same as the first two games. Clearly it's running on something different, as you can't do the old tricks. Unfortunately, it's also quite bland, and the controls seem to have suffered, especially when compared to the ultra-tight Golden Axe 2. You do get a few more variations in moves, a simpler diving slash for example, but generally it's pedestrian action. Some of the enemy designs aren't bad, although there's not a whole lot of them. It feels kinda repetitive a lot of the time because of this. The worst thing about this game though? Geez, it's just the way it looks. One of the most uninspiring beat-em-ups of them all. Golden Axe as a series is known for excellent graphics and memorable settings, and this has none of those. It's featureless. One level is literally nothing but sand dunes. Another has an utterly barren sky. The last level is a rampart. There's no creativity here, it feels like. I would almost say that the levels feel like placeholders for something better looks-wise, but the something better just never materialised. Not a good showing at all. Golden Axe 3 in many ways just feels like a beta. There's that much of a lack of polish about it to make it feel like it needed a few months more in the shed. It's a shame to see. There's the odd moment where things do work. I like the battles you have with Eve, for example, or even the stage that takes place on the back of an eagle flying to the castle, but it's not enough. And it came out just a few weeks after Revenge of Death Adder hit the arcades to boot. The series had that shorter period of prominence again, and then this comes out and disappoints utterly to the point where you really don't know where the series is at. Suddenly it feels like Golden Axe is winding down. And well, that largely proved to be true. Another Golden Axe game came out in 1994, Golden Axe Le Duel, and it changed things up totally, giving us a fighting game instead of a beat-em-up. Not a surprise, seeing as fighting games were obviously in, and beat-em-ups were fading out a little at this stage. We get another cast of characters, with a couple such as Kane Blade, Milan Flair and Julius Rockhead, who are related to other similar heroes, but the only returning character is Death Adder himself, who is playable to boot. How is it then? Well, it's alright basically. The graphics do look pretty decent and colourful, especially in the arcade version. The trouble is, however, that the game doesn't really do much to stick out from all the other fighting games that were around at the time. If you compare this to something directly rivaling it, like a Samurai Showdown 2 for instance, yeah, that's not going to go well. Nor is it going to be competing with the Street Fighters or anything like that. It's not as disastrous a game as Double Dragon 5, The Shadow Falls, far from it, but it's still very much mid-table, somewhere anonymous in the peloton. The game got ported to the Sega Saturn and looked fine there too due to that system's great 2D, but it didn't do too much business there either. And so, well, Golden Axe's time had largely passed. I don't think there were all that many attempts to bring it back in the years between this and the next time we saw it. There's the odd one here and there, but nothing like the attempts to bring back Streets of Rage. Just the occasional cameo, or a storyline in something like Sonic the Comic where the adventures of the original trio were featured for years. Plans for a TV series based on it were made, I believe, but it never materialised. And in the end, the next time we saw the axe was in 2003, when the original would be remade as part of the Sega Ages 2500 series. Right, there's no need to mix words here. This is the absolute worst Golden Axe game, full stop. Worse than any port of the original you care to mention, even the PC Engine one. The one possible thing to shout about here is a rearranged soundtrack. Other than that, it speaks for itself. This may be a budget title, but it's still a complete disaster. Torturous to play, and the graphics are abysmal. Forget about PS1, this is what I would expect a 3D Golden Axe to look like on the 3DO. The Sega Ages 2500 series was a variable collection of redone Sega classics, some of which really did work, but it's almost universally agreed that Golden Axe is the absolute worst of it. Inexplicably, this putrid mess was re-released in the West as part of the Sega Classics collection, just so that people in the USA and Europe could hate it too. What a calamity, and one wishes that no one had bothered. And so finally we get to 2008's Golden Axe Beast Rider, an attempt by Sega and developers Secret Level to revive the franchise on the Xbox 360 and PS3 in full 3D beat-em-up form. This was a game I didn't cover last time as I'd never played it, but now I can finally end a look at Golden Axe properly. I broke the bank and spent all of a $5 just so I could have a copy and bring it to you directly. The game features Tyrus Flair as the main character, while Julius and Tariq, the real name of Axe Battler now as it turns out, take non-playable roles. And of course Death Adder is the main villain. He so happens to be voiced by the late Roger Avery, aka Uncle Phil of Fresh Prince fame. I really hope that's not the coolest thing about this game. Alas, yeah, it basically is. Beast Rider is not a very good game, and was rightly crucified when it came out. To see why, you have to look at the successful beat-em-up or hack-and-slash games from around that time, the likes of Ninja Gaiden 2, which came out the same year, or Bayonetta that came the year after, alongside Batman Arkham Asylum. Against those, Beast Rider is a hopeless effort that feels years behind the times. The core gameplay is kind of a Simon Says type deal. If an enemy's attack is blue, block. If it's orange, evade. And that's it really, so long as said defence actually works, which half the time it doesn't because Tyrus is utterly ungainly as a character. And the graphics are they're forgettable, to put it mildly. It's what Golden Axe 3 would have looked like in 3D. A lot of the game is spent riding around on beasts, as you would expect from the title. Unfortunately, this part of the game is even worse. They do not feel nice at all to ride around on, let alone attack with. The worst thing might be trying to hit gnomes, which is faithfully recreated in 3D and about 1,000 times more annoying than it previously was. In the end though, the biggest sin this game commits is sheer blandness, a game so far behind the times it was dead on arrival as soon as it hit the stores. It's funny really, Uchida's first big project, Altered Beast, would suffer a similar fate with its final game on the PS2. That was bad, but this is just dull. Perhaps only one thing is worse than ending on sheer disappointment, and that's fading out into total mediocrity. And so that's basically it for Golden Axe. Short of cameos here and there, Beast Rider was the last entry in the series, and I really wouldn't hold my breath for another. Julius Thunderhead is at least represented often in Sega games. He appeared in both Sega Superstars Tennis and the excellent Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, which features a stage inspired by Golden Axe. Axe Battler and Tyrus Flair, meanwhile, seem to be a ways away. But while we may never see Golden Axe in anything other than cameos and retro re-releases from this point on, it still made a lot out of its time in the spotlight, even if that's just an influential beat-em-up which still holds some worth today, and one of the greatest games never to leave the arcade. It's still something to shout about. Bye for now. For this video I would like to thank the following: Adam Schaefer, Andrew Dalton, Andy Capt, Audie Sawley, Carly, Conformist, Daniel David Taylor, Dustin Cooper, Gary Pinkett, George Newton, Ghostly Spectre, Grayson Blackpool, James Idd, James Loveridge, Jason Durso, Jason Goy, Jason Leach, Jason Stevens, Johan Eriksson, Josh Jensen, Elle O'Brien, Lee Norris, ManagerSim.net, Mark Heslop, Mark Johnston, Mark Whittington, Martin Pataki, Nanette McCrone, Olaf Albeen, Pete Morris, Peter Jack, Peter Sidorn, Phil Taprog, Rachel Maxwell, Romeo, Ryan Wyatt Coleman, Sammy Lee, Seth Robinson, Simon Gulliver, Taylor Armand, The Unnatural, Tanyo J, Twisted Scroat, Vishar D, Yurka Operator, and Zach Roach.